Pennsylvania's Pennhurst Asylum was supposed to be a sanctuary, a place of treatment and hope for the mentally ill and the forgotten. But what transpired behind its heavy iron gates and crumbling walls turned it into a nightmare, one that still lingers to this day, echoing through the abandoned hallways in whispers, shadows, and screams that refuse to be silenced. It started as a whisper, a soft sobbing that echoed through the halls when no one was there. Then came the shadows, flickering in the periphery, always just out of reach. And finally, the disappearances, people simply erased from existence, their names struck from the records as if they had never lived. Pennhurst State School and Hospital opened its doors in 1908, a sprawling complex built to house and care for those deemed feeble-minded and unfit for society. In its early days, the asylum stood as a beacon of progressive treatment, promising a place of rehabilitation rather than punishment. But as the years passed, that promise decayed. Overcrowding, neglect, and unchecked power created a perfect storm for suffering. Reports of patients being mistreated started trickling in, but they were easily ignored by those who ran the institution. After all, who would listen to the ramblings of the insane? The asylum became a prison for its inhabitants. Shackles, restraints, and solitary confinement were used liberally. Many patients, some of whom had been sent there for minor conditions such as epilepsy or even speech disorders, never left. And then the stories began. It started with the staff, nurses, and orderlies working the graveyard shift. They would hear soft sobbing down the long, dark corridors, but when they approached the sound, they found nothing but empty beds. Some swore they saw shadowy figures darting past doorways, only to disappear when they looked directly at them. Then, patients began speaking of the man. Some said he came at night, whispering their names through the keyholes. Others claimed he dragged his fingers across the metal bars, making a sound like nails on a chalkboard. Some never spoke of him at all, but their sudden silence was enough to confirm that they had encountered him. One nurse, Margaret Lewis, lasted only 3 weeks before she quit. She refused to talk about her final night in the asylum, but her husband later revealed that she woke up screaming for 3 nights in a row after leaving. She wouldn't sleep in the dark. She wouldn't speak of Pennhurst. She simply said, "The halls don't forget." In the 1940s and 50s, whispers became screams as patients began vanishing from the records. It was chalked up to clerical errors at first. After all, Pennhurst held thousands of patients. A misplaced file here and there was nothing unusual. But the families of the missing knew better. One mother, desperate to find her son, arrived unannounced at the asylum and demanded to see him. She was turned away, told that her son had never been at Pennhurst. But she had the intake papers. She had the letters he had written to her from inside those very walls. She left in tears, never knowing what happened to her child. And she wasn't the only one. The true horror of Pennhurst wasn't revealed until much later, when investigative reporters finally gained access to the asylum's hidden corners. What they found was beyond disturbing. A series of underground tunnels connected different buildings within the asylum. They were originally built for maintenance and transport, but they had been repurposed for something far darker. In the deepest parts of the tunnels, far from the reach of natural light, were small, makeshift rooms. Some contained primitive restraints. Some had deep scratches gouged into the walls, as if someone had tried to claw their way out. And in one room, the remnants of human remains were found, bones that had never been accounted for, bodies that had never been given proper burials. No official explanation was ever given. By the time Pennhurst shut down in 1987, it had already gained a reputation for being one of the most haunted places in America. Paranormal investigators, urban explorers, and thrill-seekers all came to witness the lingering horrors firsthand. They were not disappointed. Visitors report hearing screams echoing through the empty halls. Objects move on their own. Shadow figures dart across rooms, only to vanish when confronted. Some people claim they feel an overwhelming sense of sadness and dread the moment they step inside. And then there is him. The spirit known as the man is still seen wandering the halls. Some say he is the ghost of a particularly cruel doctor, one who performed unethical experiments and hid the evidence in the tunnels below. Others believe he is something much older, something that had been waiting for a place like Pennhurst to feed on the suffering within its walls. No one knows for certain, but one thing is clear: Pennhurst Asylum is far from empty. It is waiting. Danvers State Hospital looms atop Hathorne Hill, its silhouette an ominous scar against the Massachusetts sky. Once a beacon of psychiatric innovation, it slowly morphed into a house of horrors where unspeakable acts were carried out under the guise of medicine. But even after its doors were shut, the suffering never left. Those who have dared to enter since its abandonment speak of strange noises, eerie figures, and an oppressive darkness that seems to seep from its very walls. It began with whispers, they say. Not voices exactly, but something else, like the wind speaking through the cracks of the asylum's rotting wood. The sensation of being watched was impossible to shake, yet there was never anyone there. Or at least, not anyone alive. Danvers State Hospital opened in 1878, originally intended to be a refuge for the mentally ill, a place of healing away from the prying eyes of the public. Designed in the Kirkbride style, the massive Gothic structure was meant to be airy and humane. But as the decades wore on, overcrowding choked out those early ideals. Staff became indifferent, patients forgotten, and soon, Danvers halls were filled with suffering that no walls could contain. The introduction of the lobotomy in the 1930s was hailed as a miracle cure. Desperate families sent their loved ones in, hoping they would return healed. Few did. Instead, what returned were empty shells, patients who stared blankly at the walls, drooled incessantly, or worse, never woke up at all. Some never even left the operating room. Dr. Franklin Monroe was the face of this new wave of treatment. Charismatic, ambitious, and highly regarded in his field, he performed hundreds of lobotomies at Danvers. His hands were steady, his methods precise. Patients went in screaming and came out silent. He assured the public that his work was humane, necessary, a step forward in psychiatric medicine. But behind closed doors, the truth was far more sinister. There were rumors, of course. Nurses whispered of patients taken in the dead of night, of screams that never made it past locked doors. Some claimed Monroe had a private ward, one that didn't exist on any records, where the most extreme cases were kept. Some came back from there, but they were not the same. Others simply vanished. The turning point came in 1948, when a young woman named Eleanor Hayes was admitted. She had been found wandering the streets, raving about demons and unseen figures. But Eleanor wasn't violent, nor was she a danger to anyone. She was just frightened. That, however, was enough. One night, Eleanor was taken for a procedure she hadn't consented to. The nurses reported seeing her being wheeled toward Monroe's ward, her eyes wide with terror. The next morning, she was gone. Her records were erased, her name removed from all documents, as though she had never existed. But the staff knew better. Eleanor was just another victim of the horrors beneath Danvers State. Then the hauntings began. Nurses would pass empty rooms only to hear a soft, shuddering breath from the darkness. Orderlies felt unseen hands brush their skin as they walked the halls at night. Objects moved on their own, doors locked without explanation, and the air itself seemed to hum with something just beneath the surface. And then there were the screams, echoing through the asylum, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. One nurse, a Miss Evelyn Carter, lasted only 6 months at Danvers before resigning. She would later tell friends that she had seen Eleanor, or something that looked like her. Late one night, as she was finishing her rounds, she glanced down the hall and saw a figure standing in the shadows. The shape of a woman, hair tangled, hospital gown torn. The face was obscured, but the presence was unmistakable. When Evelyn took a step closer, the figure whispered, "You let him take me." Danvers State finally shut its doors in 1992. Officially, it was due to budget cuts and deinstitutionalization efforts. But those who had worked there knew the real reason. The past had caught up to it. You can only bury so many secrets before the ground begins to stir. After its closure, urban explorers and ghost hunters came in search of the infamous spirits said to haunt its halls. Many claimed to hear the same whispers that plagued the staff decades before. Some even reported seeing her, Eleanor, still wandering, searching for something or someone. And deep within the ruins, in what was once Monroe's private ward, the air remained impossibly cold, the shadows darker than anywhere else. In 2006, most of Danvers was demolished, replaced with luxury apartments. But those who moved in quickly realized that something still lingered. Lights flickered without cause, disembodied voices murmured in the night, and tenants spoke of waking up to find shadowy figures at the foot of their beds. One resident even reported seeing a woman standing outside the building in a tattered hospital gown. When security was called, she was gone, leaving only a faint whisper behind. "You let him take me. Danvers State Hospital may be gone, but its ghosts remain. Some places never truly die. They wait." Waverly Hills Sanatorium looms over Louisville, Kentucky, its massive brick structure standing like a forgotten relic of pain and despair. Once hailed as a beacon of hope for those suffering from tuberculosis, the hospital instead became a death trap, claiming the lives of thousands. Its walls absorb the agony of the doomed, and its halls now echo with voices of the past. Even in its abandonment, Waverly refuses to be silent. Visitors speak of shadow figures lurking in the corners, ghostly whispers that slither through the empty halls, and a suffocating presence that seems to watch from every darkened doorway. But the most infamous horror lies beneath the sanatorium itself, a tunnel that became known as the body chute, where the dead were carried away in secret, hidden from the eyes of the living. The story begins in 1910, when Waverly Hills opened as a small two-story hospital. As tuberculosis ravaged the nation, the facility expanded into a self-sufficient, five-story complex, where fresh air and experimental treatments were the only weapons against the relentless disease. Patients were subjected to painful and often brutal procedures. Lungs were collapsed, ribs removed, and bodies exposed to frigid air in the belief that it would somehow cure the infection. Few left Waverly Hills alive. The hospital's death toll grew, and so did its secrets. To keep morale high and prevent panic, the bodies of the deceased were transported out of sight. The underground tunnel, originally meant for supplies, became a passage of death, where corpses were sent sliding down a hidden chute, carried away without ceremony. It was meant to shield the living from the sheer number of the dead, but it only added to the horror. The tunnel became a passage between the world of the dying and something far darker. Then came the disappearances. It started with patients, weak, emaciated figures who were last seen lying in their beds but were never found again. Nurses assured worried families that their loved ones had passed and had been removed quietly, but when grieving relatives requested records or personal belongings, they were met with silence. Then, the staff began to vanish. Nurse Mary Roberts was one of the first. A young woman devoted to her patients, she had been seen tending to the sick just before dawn, her shift ending as the first light touched the windows. But when her replacement arrived, Mary was nowhere to be found. Her uniform still hung in her locker, her belongings untouched. The only clue was a single bloody handprint smeared on the wall near the body chute's entrance. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said Mary had learned something she shouldn't have, that she had uncovered the truth about what was really happening at Waverly Hills. Others whispered that the sanatorium itself had swallowed her whole. In 1928, the terror deepened. Reports surfaced of an unidentified figure stalking the halls at night. Patients spoke of a tall, shadowy man with hollow eyes who stood at the foot of their beds, watching. Some claimed he whispered their names. Others said he reached out, his fingers inches from their faces before vanishing into the darkness. Dr. Edwin Halstead, the head physician, dismissed the claims as fevered hallucinations, symptoms of tuberculosis warping the mind. But then, one of his own orderlies fled in the middle of his shift, raving about something watching him from the corners. The orderly, a man named Thomas Greaves, was found 2 days later in the woods beyond the sanatorium. He was barefoot, his hospital uniform torn, his lips cracked from dehydration. The only thing he managed to say before slipping into a coma was, "The tunnel. Don't go into the tunnel." But someone already had. That winter, a group of young nurses dared each other to enter the body chute. It had been months since Mary Roberts' disappearance, and curiosity got the best of them. Armed with lanterns, they descended into the darkness, their laughter echoing down the concrete walls. What they saw at the bottom changed them forever. Later, when they were questioned, the nurses could barely speak. 2 were admitted as patients themselves, their minds shattered. One whispered the same phrase over and over, "He's still there. He's still waiting." By the time Waverly Hills closed its doors in 1961, the sanatorium had become a living nightmare. The bodies of over 63,000 patients had passed through its halls, some buried in unmarked graves, their suffering long forgotten by the world. But they did not rest. Urban explorers who have dared to enter since its abandonment speak of lights flickering where there is no power, doors slamming shut on their own, and a feeling of being watched from the upper floors. The shadow figure still roams, slipping through doorways, disappearing around corners, forever lurking just out of reach. But the worst experiences happen in the tunnel. The air is thick, suffocating. Whispers echo from the walls, murmuring names no one has spoken in decades. Some claim to have seen a lone nurse standing at the bottom of the chute, her uniform old and tattered, her face eerily familiar. Others hear footsteps behind them, but when they turn, they are alone. The sanatorium remains one of the most haunted places in America. It is not just a relic of the past, it is something more. Something alive. And for those who dare to enter, Waverly Hills has one final lesson. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed.